Hello, there's a great crowd tonight. This is really great to see. I'm Darian Nagel-Gam. I am the director of the Transportation Services Department for Iowa City, and I've been working with Thomas Whitman here from Nelson-Nygaard and a team of consultants from Nelson-Nygaard over the last, it's probably been about 6 months now, working on a new vision for the Iowa City transit system, and I'm so excited to see so many faces here and to see so much excitement about the potential future of Iowa City Transit. So tonight we're just going to kick it off with a really brief presentation. Thomas is going to walk us through a little bit of the study, where we're at in the study, what got us here, and talk about what our agenda is tonight and what we're really hoping to hear from you all in terms of your vision for the Iowa City Transit system. So without further ado, I will kick it over to Thomas Whitman.
I just wanted to go through from a process perspective. It's like, how do we get here, and what were some of the things we looked at when it came to the transit study? We looked at a series of different elements to get us to where we are, and what we're going to do in terms of public outreach, taking a look at how well the existing service is operating, looking at what the market for transit is throughout the region, and then begin the process of looking at, well, how do we solve this? It's like a giant jigsaw puzzle. How do we put the pieces back together? And we looked at developing a series of options, and this is where we're at right now, where we looked at, here's 3 different options that we can look at addressing some of the needs that we heard about, some of the market that we saw, and look at things we can do to improve mobility. One of the next steps after this is to take some of the feedback that we've received from you and develop a series of final recommendations that reflect the needs, the market, and the values of the community as we heard from you. Some of the things that we set out to do as a part of this process was, what were our goals? What were the things that were driving us to make, look at saying, we should make changes to the bus routes. What are those things? And some of them include, how do we increase ridership over what there is today? How do we reduce auto dependency and allow people to live a life in a car-free life in Iowa City and Coralville? How do we begin coordination more effectively between some of the agencies that provide transit within the area, and make some of the services between CAMBus, Coralville Transit, and Iowa City Transit a little bit more seamless? How do we improve communications? How do we give better information to folks so that they understand that transit is an option in Iowa City and Coralville? And what are some of those regional markets and some of those unmet demands throughout the region that we know that can make a big difference in enhancing mobility and improving people's lives through the area? So some of the things we did, before we decided to make any of the different recommendations was to take a look at, how well is the existing services operating, what is the market for it, and, what does the public say, are some of the key things we should be looking at for improvements? How can we make transit better? So we took those 3 different elements and, looked at, developing, using those as our basis for initial service concepts. And so some of the examples of some of the things that we did look at as a part of this process was boarding and alighting counts. We counted, on every trip operated by Coralville Transit and Iowa City Transit, where people were getting on and off for every trip. And on CAMBus, we looked at where people were boarding those buses. We also looked at how well that service is operating. Is service operating on time? In the afternoons, particularly, one of the findings of this in the afternoons for our, many of the operators is like services aren't really operating on time, and this is one of the things that we saw as an opportunity that we needed to begin looking at addressing when we looked at, what can we do better here. We also had an onboard survey that allowed us to understand who's riding the services right now and what some of their priorities for improvements were. How could we make service better for existing riders, and where are they going to? Some of the things we looked at from a market demand perspective was, looked at, where the densest populations, where best job populations, population densities, What are the socioeconomics of certain areas of the city? Are there areas of the city that have higher demands, higher people who need transit more than other parts of the city to help understand, are those high-need areas getting service? We looked at where high school students are going, where University of Iowa students, faculty, and staff had their origins and destinations, and began taking a look at that and said, are there gaps in service? Are there areas that should be served or have the need to be served that don't have service right now? And basically look at, are there ways we can address mobility, through the market analysis? The other thing that we did was we came out to the community, and we were in this room. It was either end of November or beginning of December, trying to talk with a series of folks and say, what are some of the things you would do to improve service? We talked with operators, said, where is it hard or where is it easy for you to operate service? What are your biggest challenges, and how can we help solve those? We talked with a series of stakeholders, including elected officials, social service agencies, a wide variety of folks to help understand, here's the need of my constituents. We're really having a challenge to get here. Can you do something about this? We had a series of public meetings. We had over 90 people show up in Coralville on campus, on University of Iowa's campus, and as well as in this room. And we created an online survey that over 1,300 people responded that said, here's my priorities, and here's some specific things we want to see as a part of this. I thoroughly enjoyed. There's open-ended comments associated with that. It's one of my favorite things to read, what it is that people want to see as part of these processes. And I'm hoping, by seeing how many people there are in the room right now, I suspect that we're going to see more than 1,300 responses from the next go-around. But I do want to say, what is one of the big findings from the public outreach perspective? It's what are the big priorities? And improving weekend service was the thing that came up repeatedly as very important. And so when we looked at how do we develop a series of alternatives or scenarios that begin addressing these needs, one of our scenarios was based specifically on how do we improve weekend service. And listening to what we heard as a part of that outreach process was one of the keys to make that happen. One of the things, by taking that big, whether we call it a funnel of different things or a jigsaw puzzle of different things, we had different priorities we wanted to begin looking at of how do we develop a series of scenarios that balanced what we heard, addressed some of the operational needs, and met the mobility needs of everybody within the community. And ultimately, we developed 3 different cost-constrained alternatives. This means, we have a certain budget today. Given that budget, here's 3 different ways, up to 3 different ways we can address or, look at addressing some of the mobility challenges that we heard. And these reflected what we heard from the outreach process and what the technical analysis. And it's based on our experience of how has this worked in other communities, and what will be effective in other communities as well. And there's 3 different scenarios there in the map. There's 3 maps behind you that reflect what those are. Their smaller versions are up on the screen right here. But ultimately, these 3 different scenarios, we want to hear from you to be able to say, what do you like about each one of these? What specific element is important to you here? I can pretty much guarantee for everybody sitting in this room, they're going to like certain things about one scenario, and they're not going to like certain things about another scenario. And so the idea behind these scenarios is not to say, I want to pick scenario 1 and that's it. It's really, what do I like about scenario 1? What do I not like about it? So that we can get that feedback and say, how can I find the right balance between each one of these so that, you see the question mark up there. It's there's 3 different scenarios, but what is it going to lead us to? We don't know that yet. We were looking to you to help us understand where that should lead us and what that service should look like. And the final recommendations will reflect what we hear as a part of this process. One of the other things we heard as a part of this process was that there's a lot more need than we can accommodate within our existing budget. And so we also developed what we called a transit vision. And there's what are some of the elements that we heard about, whether it's more frequent service, better weekend service, upgrade, better evening services, services that don't go to downtown Iowa City where I have to make a connection for everything, or even things like, service should be, fare free, that, CAN bus riders don't have to pay a fare. Why should we here? So, all of these things are reflected in a vision, and it's really, these are some steps that we can take to achieve one of the goals that Iowa City has laid out, which is how do we increase ridership by 50%? And these are some steps that we can take in order to make that happen. So the next steps for this is, for us to listen, to understand what you like, what you don't like about each one of the different scenarios. And then use that feedback to create a draft package of route changes that meet those goals. So in addition to that, there's a couple of other elements that are working concurrently with this, of taking a look at the fare policy for both Iowa City and for Coralville Transit, and said, are there innovative ways we can use fare policy to increase ridership? Anything from better pass programs to going fare free. There's a big range of things we could begin looking at, but also on the capital side, what are things that could help people use the service more regularly, whether it's electric vehicles, passenger amenities, or looking at the facilities in the downtown area to make transferring a little bit more pleasant than what it is right now. And then also looking at what are some of the new technologies that are out there that can help enhance mobility here, and work in partnership with Iowa City Transit, Coralville Transit, and CAMBus. From a timeline perspective, you see 3 scenarios here and you say, oh my God, they've already made all these decisions. No. The earliest anything can change here, the earliest, is August 2020, and that might be a little bit optimistic. But we really have quite a long time before any changes are potentially made on the street. So this is I want to thank you for coming here. We're hoping that it's a big crowd right here, and it's been a long time since I've seen this many people come out for something like this, and so I'm really excited about that. We have a lot of people in the room that have name tags on them that you can talk to about individual questions, how your route might change. Rather than doing this acute question and answer right here, I'd like to try to divide things up so we can talk with you individually about what your needs are, some of the things that you like or don't like, and walk you through some of the processes. So I want to, for all of you sitting down, direct your attention to the back, to the maps there. We have a series of handouts there as well that show summaries. Joe, can you hold up one of those? We have a series of handouts that show a summary that includes a map, as well as a brief description of what the theme is for that scenario, as well as the span and frequency of each one of those routes. We also have an online survey that's available. I'm trying to think. We should have put the link up right here. We have cards in the back right here where you can do that. This is probably the most effective way that you can easily take the time to look at the information for what the potential changes are, and have time to study it and make an informed decision of what what you might like or what you might not like. So with that, that concludes the formal presentation, and hopefully we can turn back and talk on an individual basis. Thank you.